Welcome to another episode of Miami Cop Talk. With me is my co-host and partner, Robert Asencio. I want to welcome everyone that's listening. We are one voice, one community, one community, one voice. You want to say hello to the folks, Robert?
Hi, everyone. Don't forget to check us out on MiamiCopTalk.com, and I'll turn it right back over to you, Raul.
Excellent. We want to thank our sponsors, Mainland Marlins, Miami Tactical, New Era Alliances, and Share Your Heart for helping us to sponsor this show. So as we get started, Robert, we got some hot topics to mention in today's episode. You want to go ahead and break the ice?
Man. So it's been in the news, widely publicized, created a lot of controversy throughout the country. The George Floyd, the trial of Officer Chauvin, and currently it's being played out in the news. There's live streams all over the place. But there have been some really interesting developments for the prosecution team. The defense team is arguing that the premise of clear, convincing, without doubt, the fact that the officers killed George Floyd, or the officers actually killed him, is in question. Let's talk about that, because that's really important. And certainly that's going to play into the outcome of this trial. Certainly the jurors have to be sitting down, scratching their heads. The defense has to be working their strategies a little harder now, and certainly the prosecution has to be looking at how do we, make sure that there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt that they prove that Chauvin killed Floyd. So very interesting times. Terrell, you were sharing some stuff offline. Why don't you really talk about that, because I found what you were saying to be pretty interesting.
Well, I tend to be a very pragmatic individual, and I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they were, mentioning politics and whatnot, and I kept telling them, the circumstances of this world can change, but my God doesn't. I'm a man of faith, and I try to go based on what facts and the truth lead me to believe. I don't believe my lying eyes many a times. So when I look at what's going on with George Floyd, there's so much emotion in there, and and I understand the emotions. Emotions tend to be real for people, and we can spark emotions. You walk into a birthday party, and emotions are very you're joyful. It's a birthday party. You walk into a funeral, your emotions are different. So we can basically trigger our emotions, and there are people that are in the business of triggering people's emotions for specific outcomes and specific agendas. Now, I will tell you this: what's going on with George Floyd is a very sad thing for law enforcement as a whole. I think basically what we're looking at is another potential Freddie Gray, another potential Zimmerman kind of thing, where there may be a possibility that the officer charged with murder may be acquitted. Remember, we're in a situation where it's beyond a reasonable doubt, and there has been plenty of doubt presented, and actually by the prosecution itself in cross testimony, cross questioning by the defense, that he ate too many drugs, or this, that, the other. So I think maybe the fact that the officer was charged with murder, it's going to be now a difficult thing.
Let's talk about what you were saying and what's been coming out about the doubt. What has created the doubt? Because this in itself, you're talking about emotions, man. Just by us saying that the officer may not be convicted of murder is pretty emotional for those people that saw the video. And look, by no stretch of the imagination, I think I speak for you, Raul, we want to make it very clear. The officer's actions, multiple officers' actions, all the officers there were wrong. That is correct. Just wrong, and it can be construed as criminal. But what is the appropriate charge for correct. What they actually correct. Did is correct. Really in question here. But you made some very, very valid points. I mean, you've been following the trial. You yourself have tried and built cases, right? Taken to the prosecution, worked and correct. Helping them be tried. talk about that, Raul, because that's very, very
I'll
important.
tell you, the fact is that uh, you have the court of public opinion and you have the court of law, two totally different things. In the court of public opinion, this officer, Chauvin, I believe his name is, he's guilty in the court of public opinion. And depending on where you stand in your public opinion, you think that the offer, and I think for most people, overall, they believe that the officer acted appropriately. As a matter of fact, I can remember specifically when this happened, and I was talking to my wife last night when this incident occurred, and I saw the video and it was on the news. I was saying to my wife, "What is that guy doing? Why is he still on him? Why does he have his knee on the guy? Why is he still doing this?" It just looked horrible, and I want to tell everyone out there and the listeners, police work doesn't look good sometimes. It just doesn't look nice. It is not a clean business sometimes when you're trying to have someone comply that's resisting, that is being aggressive. And those key words, aggressive, resistance. George Floyd at one point was not resisting and was not being aggressive. So the minute that aggression, you got to de-escalate. And when you look at that from a trained perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, you got to de-escalate. Once the guy surrenders, once the guy stops being aggressive, once the guy is not resisting, you got to de-escalate. And it just didn't look right, and that was totally inappropriate. Now, did he murder George Floyd? You know what? That is something that I believe, some of the medical reports, the autopsy, and now some of the testimony is bringing severe doubt into whether the officer caused the George Floyd's death. I know I read a CNN reporter yesterday saying, "Well, I don't care if George Floyd ate too many drugs or did this or did that. Why didn't the officer do this, that, and the other?" And valid points. Why didn't the officer, take his knee off him? Why did the officer not immediately start addressing the fact that George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe"? Why didn't he address what the subject's concerns were? I've arrested many of people throughout my career in law enforcement, and the minute somebody told me they were having some kind of medical distress, and I took that seriously. So the fact that the officer may have been negligent in not following policies, procedures, and guidelines doesn't mean that he killed him. But it does mean that he may have not followed policy, procedures, and guidelines. But he was charged with murder. Did he murder him? And that's what we're looking at now in the trial. And to my concern would be that, let's say, I don't know what's going to happen, but when you bring reasonable doubt into a courtroom, our system of justice means you cannot convict. So there has been.
Well, let's talk about those instances of doubt, right? Those facts of doubt that have been introduced. This morning, I was watching the news and I was watching the recap of so far what's occurred in the trial, and there's now been brought to light that there were some pills that in the backseat of the vehicle that George Floyd was seen. The way the whole incident occurred, the vehicle that was used, there were some pills there. They had DNA of George Floyd on it, and now they're saying that the drugs in George Floyd's system, the toxicology report shows that they have been, and George Floyd's prior medical history played contributing part in his death. The question is, did the officers cause George Floyd's death? Did the Chauvin's kneeling on Floyd, was that the reason why he died? And I think to convict in murder, you have to show convincing evidence
beyond a reasonable
doubt. And that's where right now we're looking at a trial that there's been some doubt. But do you have anything else? Because this is fascinating to me. Do we have another case where remember O.J. Simpson, the criticism of O.J. Simpson's trial. Now, I'm not a prosecutor, nor have I ever been a prosecutor, but the criticism post-trial was that the prosecution case was not built as strong as it could have been. And therefore, you know, the defendant walks, right?
Correct.
And then you have
Correct.
Johnny Cochran on the other side. Remember, may he rest in peace, with the glove, the famous glove scene,
Correct.
where the prosecution was using the glove as evidence, and then they brought Simpson in and they had him try the glove and it did not fit.
Correct. Yeah, people need to realize that, you know, and it's a tough job for the prosecution. That's why when they charge a defendant, the charge has got to be proven. Sometimes people say, well, why didn't they charge him with this, which is a greater crime? And that's because that greater crime is harder to prove. Could they have charged this officer in George Floyd with, you know, a lesser crime than murder? You know, I don't know, culpable negligence, or, you know, who knows? But I think what happens is that, you know, in many cases, there is a community outcry that's trying to be satisfied. And it brings me to this recent incident that we had here in Miami. The lady was trying to be, that she was being evicted. That specific incident reminded me somewhat of the Breonna Taylor case. The Breonna Taylor case, they went to serve a warrant. They went ahead and in the process of serving the warrant, someone from inside the resident fired at the officers. The officers returned fire, and they killed Breonna Taylor. That created.
There was a big difference, though, between cases. You know, that and Breonna Taylor, they were at the wrong house. In this case, that occurred last night or yesterday. Correct. They were at the right house, and the lady was shot at the officers as they were trying to make entry because they had already visited her a number of times. And thank God the officers were in Kevlar, because I believe that that's what saved the officers, the shield that they were. Apparently this lady had a history of violence, but yeah, man, at the end of the day.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, you're absolutely right.
Fired on.
Yeah, correct. That's the point I'm getting. Right house, wrong house. That's not the issue that I'm bringing up. The issue I'm bringing up, officers at a resident, they're fired upon from inside. They return fire. They kill somebody inside. You know, that when you look at the elements of those specifics, what happened to the officers in the Breonna Taylor case? They were not charged, acquitted, whatever, you know, and I believe the Attorney General of the state didn't charge them. One of them got fired for policy.
As they should.
Yeah, correct.
As they should.
But there was no murder charge in the Breonna Taylor case. Like there won't be a murder charge in the case here in Florida. You know, police officers get to your house, and they may be at the wrong house. If you're shooting at them from inside the house, I can almost 100% guarantee you they're going to return fire. So,
you know, it's interesting. It's interesting, Raul, because in the case yesterday, I mean, clearly justifiable homicide, right? And the law allows for that.
Correct, but you know, you brought up a very good point. Justifiable, but there are a lot of people on social media, and again, we have the platforms. Everyone's a Monday morning quarterback that are saying, "Well, she was acting in self-defense. She was standing her ground. You know, Homestead. You know, she was in the home. She was being evicted. You know, but the fact
that one minor problem. Here's one minor problem.
No, it breaks my heart. You know, there's a loss of life here. You know, and my heart goes out to the family. That she's somebody's daughter, maybe somebody's wife, sister. What? It's a horrible situation when life is lost. But when you start arguing based on emotions, let me make it perfectly clear for all our listeners: the law has no emotions. People do. And what happens is when people try to infuse your emotions into law, it doesn't work that way. The law has no emotions. People do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us to the point of what we're discussing here. We're talking about, you know, facts versus emotions.
Correct.
Facts versus beliefs, facts versus rumors, facts versus non-facts. You know, going back to the shooting at Brickell, man, it's tragic because my understanding is that now it's surfacing that the lady came in for a party. Can you imagine being the owner of that apartment and having a guest come in for a party and never leave? A year later, you're still trying to get people evicted. And then because of the moratorium, look, I believe in protecting people. You know, we definitely need to protect people.
Well, Robert, come on. You're Puerto Rican. I'm Cuban. My wife's Puerto
Well, what
Rican.
does Puerto Rican have to do with this?
We've had plenty of people show up at our house for parties that don't want to leave. So
My family, but that's not the case here.
yeah, exactly. You got to leave. The party's over, man. When the party's over, you got to leave.
But can you imagine having a stranger, a lady, in your house? That heck, she not only moved in, she moved in her pets,
Yeah,
and then have the COVID hit, and you can't get rid of the lady.
Hey, listen, we don't.
Moratorium.
We try to limit. We try to limit the level of controversy in our program here in Miami Cop Talk. But if you want to start talking about people coming into your home and staying beyond their welcome, or people that are not welcome coming into your house, that may take us into immigration, and we don't want to go there. We just don't want to go there.
Well, we definitely need to do a show on immigration because our brothers and sisters behind the badge are protecting the laws of this country, and we definitely need. Look, we do know that one fact: the laws of this country need to be changed, and I guess that's the constant fight, right? That's the money battle that we see in the politics and the rhetoric, and those people are pushing buttons.
That's exactly the trigger. Those are the ones that are the politicians, and you were one at one time. Yeah, those are the ones that have their finger. They got their finger on the trigger, and they know.
That's why I'm saying it. Hey, and I make no bones about it. I seek to influence legislation that will benefit our police officers. As a matter of fact, let's talk about the Marcys Law. The police officers being covered under Marcys Law, right?
I think it's a beautiful thing.
So whether it was officers that had been on the street fired upon, or somehow the victim of aggression that forced them to shoot, or the incident that played out in the news yesterday, day before yesterday on Brickell, where they go in to evict a person, the officers come under fire. The officers are lawfully at the place where they should be at. They're lawfully executing their duties. Bam, they're shot at. In the past, those officers return fire. The one officer, two officers, whoever it is that kills the person, right? Again, justifiable homicide under old law, Florida State Statute 119. The officer's information, public records release is released. No protection. So in Jacksonville, there was an officer that was involved in the shooting. He had to take out a subject, killed him. And then the issue was that the officer's information was plastered all over the place, right? But is the officer a victim? I would say, yeah. If the officer shot at and forces to shoot back, the officers, just because you're an instrument of the law does not mean that you're not a victim, right? And then we go back to your Fourth Amendment, right? So unreasonable search and seizure, releasing of your name, releasing of your information. Do you have rights? Do you have rights to protect your identity? Because once your information is out there, we know, Raul, how many people have you had stalking you or following you? Come on. You can say it now. Come on. You're out of the job. Come on.
Well, I'm not like you. I know that you left law enforcement. You became a politician. I know you're in the bunker somewhere that undisclosed, and the women are after you all over the place.
Boy, what a pivot! What a pivot! This guy's a professional in the making. Did you guys catch that? This guy just pivoted. But, hey, at the end of the day,
you're right. Listen, I believe in the statute already protecting first responders, law enforcement, whatnot, on confidentiality. And there's a huge disdain by a certain segment of our population against police and whatnot. So now. Yeah. So do you want our officers to be subject to the doxing, the people showing up at their homes? And listen, we just had an incident in Brickell we were talking about. If you start showing up at officers' homes and creating havoc because you hate the police, some of what we've seen up in the northwest of our country, up in Portland, Seattle, and Antifa, and so on and so forth, I can guarantee you there's going to be some gunfights. But the fact of the matter is, we need to try to protect those that are protecting us from unjustly being persecuted by radical lunatics in our society. I will say this, we don't tend to talk about it. I have friends in the medical profession. The third leading cause of death in this country are medical mistakes. Imagine if we start plastering the names, address, and information of doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators that are, you know, technically the individuals involved in all these deaths. Can you imagine? So at some point in time, we need to have some rational thinking in our society, some common sense, which I try to live my life by common sense principles. And I don't know why we call it common, because it doesn't tend to be very common among most people. But common sense practices are something that we should look at, and best practices. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of emotions that are being triggered by agendas and so on and so forth. And I will applaud those politicians that are doing the right thing um, at state capitals in DC. But as you all know, there's a lot of money and influence involved in politics, and sometimes decisions are made that don't make a lot of common sense.
And that puts officers in jeopardy. So at the end of the day, we come back to Marcys Law. So under Marcys Law, the officers, actually, an officer in Jacksonville, his information was released. He, through I believe it was a PBA, filed a complaint, and they believe that the officer's name should have been protected. The lower court ruled that it was not protected. The officer's identity was not protected from public disclosure. It went to an appeals court, First District Court of Appeals in North Florida, I believe in Leon County, has just ruled, this is breaking, that the officers now have coverage under Marcys Law when they're victims and they're forced to act. And I agree with that. I agree with that. Now, I wanted to get something real quick here, and I know we're running out of time. We have to wrap up the show here, but you just mentioned Antifa. There's no proof that it actually is an organized entity, right? So that is something that it doesn't matter whether it's a so-called mythical Antifa or it's actually QAnon or it's whomever. The point is that our officers, the first responders, all first responders, public servants as a whole are being scapegoated and they're being attacked. And we want to make sure that we put the facts where they need to be. Brother, you and I may not agree on some issues, but at the end of the day, I know we agree on this. Law enforcement is a noble job. Law enforcement first responder work. It's not just first responder dispatchers, firefighters, medical services. They are heroes. They do what others will not do. They go after those that attack us, that commit crimes.
Well,
sometimes they make mistakes.
Yeah. Well, no, recent politics are showing, how much we value our law enforcement, because just last summer and with the BLM and a lot of issues out there, that defund the police became a rhetoric out there that people were chanting on every street corner. Even some of our highest politicians were considering defunding police and or reallocating funds in one way or another. But the fact of the matter is, now that they're suffering the consequences, people retiring. I retired last year. People leaving law enforcement, people not wanting to go into that profession. They're starting to realize what the consequences of that rhetoric was. So when you look at a place like Minneapolis, going back to a full circle, the George Floyd situation, they're now going to fund, and they need another 200 officers, and they're going to start paying. So they went full circle from taking money away and officers leaving to now pumping tons of money. The mayor of Atlanta just said she wants to hire an additional 200 officers. Now, one of the things that you and I have always talked about, listen, training, policy, procedures, training. We've talked about this offline. There's a lot of technology out there, artificial intelligence. There are a lot of things that are going to change law enforcement as a whole in the decades to come. But to say we don't need law enforcement would be like saying we don't need grocery stores.
But yeah, we want anarchy.
Yeah, it's a go try to find food on your own. We don't need grocery stores. I think people need to really make responsible statements when they're in positions of leadership. I remember, if you remember vividly, the mayor of Minneapolis during George Floyd. And again, to try to finish off here, when they asked him, he was a young guy, very charismatic, and they asked him at a rally, "Hey, do you support defunding the police?" And he said no, and they were going to run him out of town because it wasn't a popular thing. Going back to what we were saying, you got the court of law and court of public opinion. Sometimes they don't mesh, and I think it's very here's a advice to politicians out there: when you're gonna say something you truly don't believe in, don't say it. Don't say it.
Then a lot of
Yeah,
them would be quiet.
yeah, don't
Wouldn't that be
say
a
it.
trust?
I know you're out there peddling for votes, but if you don't believe it, don't say it. It's more honorable to lose an election than to lose your integrity.
A lot of them don't have integrity, sadly. So, but listen, what do you say we really consider doing a show for those that are maybe trying to get into law enforcement, the public, obviously. Talk about training, man. When do we do a couple series on training and bring in some trainers and really talk about, the importance of training? Because I know that when it's all said and done, that tragedy, George Floyd's death, uh, the officers, however they contributed, whether they're charged, they're, under lesser crimes, or it turns out, as you said before, a case where they're going to be charged with violating George Wright's civil rights federally, will always come back to some level of training and
Absolutely.
as a contributor. And that's something that you know very well.
Yeah, I think we don't have subpoena power here on Miami Cop Talk, so we can't subpoena police officers who are involved in training to come on the show and give their opinion. And a lot of officers are hesitant to give their opinion publicly because of, again, whatever backlash or whatnot. And let's make it perfectly clear. We both agree that the actions in George Floyd should have not gone the way they did. Those officers did not act the way we believe they should have acted. Did they murder George Floyd or not? Well, I guess the jury, our system of justice, is going to determine that. But from a training standpoint, we would like to bring trainers on. I know we've reached out to some that are a little hesitant at voicing their opinion publicly because of a potential backlash. And I think that's a very sad thing when we start, you know, ending conversations and dialogue because people may be canceled or persecuted in public places. That's not what this country's about. We want to be able to speak freely. I had a conversation with a very young, inspiring college student here in one of our local universities here that shall remain nameless. I don't want to slam any university, but they were saying how about hate speech and hate speech, hate speech. And I said, well, what is hate speech? And he mentioned a couple of things he didn't like. And I said, well, because you don't like it doesn't make hate speech. I mean, if that were the case, then broccoli would be a hate term. So the fact of the matter is, hate speech is protected under our First Amendment. If you don't like it, we are free to be offended in this country. And the fact of the matter is, we can move on. Let's agree to disagree. I mean, I don't agree on your hairstyle, Robert, but I agree to go ahead and still call you my friend.
Same here, brother. Same here. You know what? For me, it's we're fellow Americans. We serve behind the badge. I can remember many times calling for, as we'd say down the call in South Florida, 315. I need emergency backup. The crap has hit the fan, as they say. Being pinned and looking up and seeing you come to us, my backup, and I can't thank you enough. I can't thank all those
Same here.
who
Same
we
here.
know and don't know, because you call on the radio, people show up. I can remember that time when we were being shot at,
Yeah.
and one of many times, but looking up and seeing the cavalry coming and seeing that line of
Yeah,
blue
and you
and
don't
red
care when you're asking for
coming.
help. When you're asking for help, you don't care if it's a man, woman, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. You want help, and that is a brotherhood, a sisterhood. And I think that as a society, we need to start looking at the fact that when you're in a situation of vulnerability, you can't be selective. And many times we find ourselves in society in vulnerable circumstances, and we start picking sides, and that just weakens the fabric of who we are as a country.
Yeah. And the police, first responders, the whole public sector system, that's the human infrastructure of government. That's what we want to do, is point out the value of what they do. And
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we have a new chief here in South Florida, in Miami, Art Acevedo, and he uses the term uh, relational policing, and I think there's a lot of relationship issues that are need to be dealt with. Um, and I think, again, we need to build dialogue, and I think that's what we're trying to do here in Miami Cop Talk, build a dialogue where we can go ahead and discuss issues that may be a little controversial, but ultimately we could agree to disagree and move forward. Robert, I think we've lost your video feed. You're frozen on my end, but we want to go ahead and finish off this episode. We've lost Robert's feed. That's part of modern day technology. So on behalf of Robert Asencio and myself, Raul Correa, and Miami Cop Talk, thank you for participating, listening, share this podcast, this new experience called Miami Cop Talk with your friends. Let's try to build our audience. Let's try to get more engagement. And we want to go ahead and hey, there's Robert. Robert, I was getting ready to sign off. I thought you were doing the mannequin challenge for a minute there, but the fact of the matter is we lost our feed. You're back on. So we're getting ready to sign off, Robert. I wanted to say, have our listeners and audience visit our website, miamicoptalk.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, YouTube, Miami Cop Talk. And you want to close us off, Robert? Well, no audio. All right, here we go. Let me click the mic.
Well, it looks like my internet this morning is giving me trouble. So I wanted to thank everyone for being with us, and please help us grow, share our information, but more importantly, chime in, leave your responses. You're important to this conversation. Thank you, Ron.
All right, thank you. Till next time.